Okay, Frank, then as we transition into our next topic here, I had one more realistic one. I wanted to find a match for each of your top five on the trade targets board. So we got one more, and it's for one of your top five, Scott Lawton. Do you think there's a world, and it's Lawton to Toronto for Nick Robertson, Ben Danford, and a third? Is there any world where Philly doesn't get a first-round pick and is okay with roster players in return?
So I was told the Flyers would be interested and willing to do Fraser Minton straight up for Scott Lawton. I was told that's also a no for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the Flyers like Minton. I don't know how they feel about Ben Danford. I mean, I guess they would take a flyer on Nick Robertson, like no pun intended. And like this would make sense to me. Like I could see this working. Might be too much from Toronto's perspective, to be honest.
So to ask you the let's find a match question, like I still just think the best match for Lawton is Toronto. A clear need, the cap hit, the term, all of that. Like to me, Toronto.
He actually wants to go. I think he wants to go there and already has a place in Toronto. There's a lot of great reasons why it's a good fit. I think something like that could get it done. It just might be too much.
Yeah, fair. What about Brock Nelson? We just did the mock trade of him going to Winnipeg. Obviously, a lot of smoke there. What's the match for Brock Nelson as we inch closer to the deadline?
So I think it's easier to start narrowing down the field of what doesn't match. Anthony DeMarco had the story on dailyfaceoff.com just a few hours ago. And I was told yesterday, the Minnesota Wild are not expected to be big players. They don't have cap space. They're in cap hell at the moment. And I think there was some thought of, would Kirill Kaprizov be out for the remainder of the regular season? Could they use his LTIR space? The answer to that at this point in time is no. So unless there's something else at play here, you can cross off Minnesota as a Brock Nelson destination unless they're moving out another piece back. So I think probably unlikely to Minnesota. That leaves Winnipeg. That leaves... Who else is looking for a center? Colorado. I think there's a few other Washington possibilities, but we'll have to see how that market unfolds.
So we did Lawton, we did Nelson. Let's go to number 3 on your board, and that would be Brandon Tanev. I know Pierre LeBrun tweeting today that, hey, the Kraken are open to keeping 50% of them. It's like, yeah, $3.5 million. That would make sense. But if he's at 50%, is there anyone out there who you think maybe jumps a little bit quicker on Tanev?
Probably not. I mean, I don't think there's any news there. We've known that Seattle is going to do what it takes to move on from these guys. It's so easy to retain on a guy that you have an expiring contract for. The retained salary transaction slot doesn't last long. So, obviously very likely that Tanev's on the move. The production has been just okay, but I mean, I think the speed, the forechecking ability, the tenacity, all those things really matter when it comes to the postseason. And, he hasn't been quite the same as he was before, but I think still pretty good.
Potential landing spots, just quickly to wrap this up. Jake Evans and Riley Smith. Give me a team for each of those two guys to watch.
Jake Evans, Washington. I don't think, I know a lot of people in Edmonton would love to have him. I don't think he's a fit there. I think Colorado needs more than that. I think Winnipeg needs more than that. It's the interesting thing about Jake Evans. Ryan Donato scored again last night. And I think the Habs think they can get a late first round pick for Evans. Donato has double the goals that Evans does. And Donato has more goals than Gustav Nyquist had points this year. And he got a second. And he has the optionality to play center. I just think that might be a real value play for someone. So it's been a little bit more difficult to connect the dots on Evans. I think there's a ton of teams that are calling and are real curious about the price. There's two other parts about Evans. One, the Canadians are still talking contract extension, but their goal in re-signing him, if they do, is that it's a contract that remains tradable for the future. And two, they're still squarely in the playoff mix. So what they want to avoid is what teams like Buffalo are experiencing right now by virtue of the trade tree that we just talked about, whatever that was, they don't want to send a message to Cole Caulfield and Uri Slafkovsky and Lane Hudson. Hey, this season, these games don't matter. I think that's how you end up in the spot that Buffalo's in. And they want to make sure that's not the case. So there's a lot going on, a lot up in the air with the Montreal Canadiens and Jake Evans.
All right, let's move along, Frank. Quickly, I want to talk about the defensive market around the league right now. I mean, all of your top 5 are forwards. In fact, out of your top 20, it's Byram, Soucy, Alexiak, and Ferraro. It's only 4 defensemen in that group. Is it fair to assume if someone's watching this show and their team needs to get a defenseman, our price is going to be sky high? Because the other thing with those 4 guys is they also all come with some amount of team control, whether it's Byram being an RFA or the other 3 having a year left on their deals.
Yeah, and I think the important part of this defense market conversation is that it's relative quality. Like, I think you're looking at guys that could be impact pieces. So I'm not convinced that we're going to see someone like Byram on the move. Same thing with some of the other guys in Buffalo that we just talked about, because these guys are under team control. There's not a fire sale to move them. And, you know, you look at the future, it's probably a lot better for Buffalo if they're going to do major roster surgery to do it in the summer when you can deal with a full deck of teams. When it comes to, like, I'd be calling Seattle, though, about Jamie Alexiak and try and figure out, like, hey, this is a guy with size that can defend, that the contract is real reasonable. He's not a rental. Seattle has 4 guys in my top 20 on the trade targets board. I'd be, I think they're going to be a very active team over the next few days.
To find the first true rental on your board, I mean, defensemen 5 and 6 are Murphy and Ristolainen, both with term. You actually have to get to Brian Dumoulin and Ryan Suter to get to the first batch of true rental team men, which is crazy.
And Suter might not move. He's sort of hinted at the idea that he would potentially like to re-sign in St. Louis, and he's actually been really good this year, given what he signed for and where he's at in his career. Definitely a surprise. And by the way, St. Louis, 1 point out.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.